My daughter-in-law whispered, "She's not family. She gets nothing from the $112 MS estate." The lawyer smiled, then handed me the ring box. It's you. Who do you think you are, you greedy old witch? Shut up and stay in that tiny basement or I'll show you what regret means. That was the first thing Clarice screamed at me as I stepped into my own living room. Not a hello, not a hug, not even a moment of silence for the man I'd shared a life with for 47 years. My feet had barely crossed the threshold. The scent of lemon polish and expensive perfume hit me before anything else, along with the cold truth. I didn't belong here anymore. I had come home thinking there would be morning comfort, perhaps a candle still burning for David. But instead, I found a party, a white and gold banner stretched across the archway. Celebration of new energy. My wedding photo, the one of David lifting me in his arms outside the courthouse in '77, was gone. In its place stood a blown-up canvas of Clarice and my son Andrew, dressed in coordinated beige, smiling like magazine models. The living room had been rearranged. Every photo of my husband and me, our trip to Yosemite, our first Christmas with Andrew the porch swing we'd built together, vanished my deaths. My photo of my husband and me, our trip to Yosemite, our first Christmas with Andrew, the porch swing we built together, Where's the family album? I asked softly. Clarice looked up from her flute of champagne. In the attic where ghosts go. I stood there, clutching the handles of my overnight bag. I'd only been gone 40 days. 40 days since I'd buried my husband, moved into a temporary care facility to grieve in peace, and given them the space they asked for. I hadn't expected a welcome party, but I hadn't expected a funeral for my place in this house either. I walked toward my bedroom, our bedroom, and found the door painted sage green with a gold plaque screwed above the frame. It read, Chamber. Clarice followed close behind, her voice syrupy sweet. I thought you might like the fresh energy. That old furniture really held a lot of grief. I opened the door. Everything was gone. Our bed gone. The cedar chest David had carved in '82 gone. My lace curtains, the embroidery hoops, the quilt he gave me on our 25th anniversary. All of it replaced with velvet cushions, quartz crystals, and a freestanding mirror shaped like an eye. This isn't your room anymore, she said, placing a hand on my shoulder. Your things were redistributed. I turned to her. Where am I expected to sleep? She smiled. We set up a cozy spot for you in the living room close to the exit. Just in case. That night, I sat upright on the floral-patterned couch, the only thing left untouched by her redecorating. Every time someone walked past, they stared as though I were some relic on display. You're closer to the exit this way? Clarice said again when I turned to face the wall. Andrew never looked at me. Not once. He poured drinks for Clarice's friends, told them about the new leadership role he'd taken at the company, David's company. He didn't mention his father's name. At one point, I heard one of her friends whisper, "Is she even in the will or just haunting it?" They laughed. I stayed silent. I sat through it all, clenching the hem of my sweater, biting the inside of my cheek. I reminded myself this was just shock, just temporary madness. That grief made people cruel. But then came the toast. Clarice raised her glass high. 2 new beginnings. And then before she could lower it, her eyes landed on me. Her smile flattened. She pointed. You. It's you. Who do you think you are? You greedy old witch. Shut up and stay in that tiny basement, or I'll show you what regret means. The room went quiet, and then laughter, nervous forced, disbelieving. But no one stopped her. Not Andrew, not the neighbors, not the old friend of David's who had once called me the backbone of this family. No one said a word. I looked at my son. He shifted his eyes away. My cheeks burned not from shame, but from clarity. This wasn't temporary. They meant to erase me. Every photo taken down, every item was donated, every label reprinted, every smile that pretended I'd never existed. I stood there, back straight, lips tight. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I remembered David's words spoken in the hush of night after a similar fight with Clarice years ago. If the day ever comes when they try to push you out of this house, don't argue. Don't beg. Don't even raise your voice. Fight with your mind. Be quieter than shame, but sharper than regret. I let the last echo of Clarice's voice hang in the air like smoke from a fire about to be extinguished. Then I turned and walked to the old cedar drawer. still tucked under the stairs. I opened it slowly. They hadn't gotten to that one yet. Inside was a folded handkerchief embroidered with my initials and David's, and beneath that, wrapped in blue velvet, David's wedding band. I slipped it into my pocket because they had forgotten one thing. I may have been just his shadow in their eyes, but shadows are always tied to light, and I still had plenty of light left in me. I woke the next morning to the sound of a vacuum humming over my head. Clarice's voice cut through the ceiling like a drill. "Remember to clear the guest closet. We need space for the chakra wall." I sat up on the couch, my back sore, neck stiff. The blanket they'd given me was paper thin and smelled like lavender mixed with bleach. I made my way to the hallway, intending to brush my teeth, but as I passed the coat closet, something caught my eye. The door was slightly ajar, and something heavy pressed against it from inside. I opened it, my knees nearly buckled. There, wedged between a pair of old rubber boots and a mop bucket, was David's urn, covered in dust, tilted sideways, forgotten like a misplaced umbrella. I reached for it with shaking hands. Just as I pulled it into my arms, Clarice appeared behind me holding a clipboard and a paint swatch. Her eyes narrowed. "Oh, that I told Andrew to toss it weeks ago," she said, casually flipping a page. "It's just Ash. He left everything to us anyway. The past is dead. Evelyn tried joining the future for once." I looked down at the urn. Its brass surface was scratched, the engraving barely visible. David Samuel Harper, beloved husband. Before I could speak, she took a step forward, grabbed it from my arms with both hands, walked toward the front door, and flung it. Right into the garden. I heard the dull thud as it landed among the ailas. "Problem solved," she said without turning. Then she disappeared down the hallway. I stood frozen. For a long time, the world became muffled. All I could hear was the echo of that metallic clatter and the sound of my own heartbeat. My hands trembled, but not from grief. This was something colder. I stepped outside. The air was sharp, the morning wind full of pine and resentment. I searched through the bushes, kneeling despite my joints screaming in protest. My fingers brushed cold metal. I pulled the urn close, clutching it to my chest like a child. That's when I felt something underneath it, taped to the bottom. Hidden beneath the velvet base was a folded linen handkerchief, embroidered with the letters E and D in a pattern only the two of us had ever used. Inside the fold was a tiny USB drive and a note faded handwritten. "Only you know what's real." I pressed the cloth to my face, breathing in the faint scent of cedar wood and cologne. David always kept things secret quiet, but he always trusted me to find them. He had tucked away answers, left me a trail. Not for the others, for me. Later that evening, I was in the kitchen boiling water for tea when I heard soft footsteps behind me. "Grandma." I turned. It was Emily, my granddaughter, 8 years old. Small for her age, wearing a sweater 2 sizes too big. She glanced nervously down the hall, then tiptoed toward me and reached into her pocket. She held out a small scrap of cotton. At first, I didn't understand. Then I recognized the fabric pale blue with tiny white flowers. The corner still had a faded stain of lavender oil. It was from my pillow, the one I'd slept on for 30 years. "They burned your pillow," Emily whispered. Clarice said it smelled old. "I took this before they did it." I took it from her with both hands gently. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said softly. "That was very kind." She looked up at me with eyes too old for her age. "I don't like how they treat you. Mommy says you're just leftover." "But I think leftovers are good. They have more flavor." I almost laughed. Almost. But instead, I reached out and pulled her into a hug. And for the first time since David passed, I let myself cry. Just a little. Just enough. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at the small kitchen table with the USB stick in my hand. My old laptop still worked, albeit slowly. I plugged it in. The screen flickered. Inside the folder was a series of labeled files. House deed Harper PDF, stock accounts, Evelyn owner, private letter to Evelyn P4. I didn't open them yet. I just stared at the screen at David's handwriting scanned into digital form. Only I knew what was real. And what was real was about to change everything. I wasn't sleeping much, not on that couch, not in that house. One night around 2 o'clock in the morning, I lit one of David's old candles, the ones he always placed on his desk in the study. He used to say they helped him think. Sandalwood and cedar-heavy scents masculine grounding. I watched the flame flicker then settle. The wick glowed steady and still, just like him. As the wax melted, I noticed something strange. There was a lump and unnatural bulge forming just beneath the surface. I leaned closer. Something was embedded deep in the candle. I let it burn lower until the wax softened. Then, using a paring knife from the kitchen, I cut into the center carefully like a surgeon. Inside, wrapped in a thin layer of foil, was a small black device. I held it up to the light. A voice recorder, old, nearly antique. David always hated the cloud. The truth should be held in your hands, he once said. I recognized the make instantly. It was the same model he used back in the 90s when he'd dictate letters. My fingers trembled as I pressed play. The speaker clicked. Then his voice, David's voice, poured into the silence. If they ever erase her, then erase them from everything. If they try to bury your name, love dig them out with the truth. This house breathes because of her, the warmth that's her. The foundation her sacrifices. If you're hearing this, Evelyn, it means they tried to make you small, smaller than you've ever been, and that means it's time. He paused. The files are with the USB. The documents are dated, notarized, and buried where no one thought to look except you. The message ended with a soft exhale like he'd just laid something heavy to rest. I sat motionless for a long time. He had known. He had known they'd try to wipe me away like dust on a picture frame. And he had prepared for it. The next morning, I found the refrigerator door covered in pastel sticky notes. Clarice's handwriting in bold capital letters. Almond milk, not for seniors. Snack drawer residents only. Do not touch. Mind your age. It was as if she were labeling a child in timeout, as if my presence was a nuisance to be managed. When I tried to connect to the Wi-Fi on my laptop, a new network name popped up. Residents only. I stared at the blinking cursor on the login screen. Not even the internet wanted me here. Later that afternoon, she taped a sheet of paper on the inside of the front door in pink cursive, framed with hand-drawn flowers, cleansed of the past. Ghost-free home. I stood there reading it for what felt like an hour. The tape was crooked, so I straightened it. Then I went back to the study and packed the candle, the recorder, and the USB into a padded envelope addressed to Charles Whitman, David's personal attorney. The only one who ever called me by my full name. The only one who had looked me in the eye at the funeral and said, "You mattered most, and I know it." I didn't write a note. He wouldn't need one. That night, Clarice threw another party, just a small one. Yoga friends sound bowls wine in tall, stemless glasses, all of them in white robes. As I passed through the kitchen, someone asked her, "Who's that woman again?" Clarice laughed. "Oh, her," she said. "That's the leftover." I didn't flinch. I poured myself a glass of water, returned to the couch, and opened my notebook. A real one, leather-bound, the kind David used to love. On the first page, I wrote Phase 1, let them mock. Phase 2, let them forget. Phase 3, let them learn. Then I underlined it twice. It started with a knock. Not on the front door, but on the truth. Charles called me the next morning. I found it. He said, no preamble, no small talk. The original will dated 3 years ago. Handwritten codicil, initialed, witnessed, sealed. My breath caught. Does it say he didn't let me finish if Evelyn Harper is ever mistreated, evicted, or otherwise dishonored within the primary residence of 1188 Huntington Drive, all assets, including property, financial accounts, and corporate shares, shall revert to her name exclusively? My husband had known down to the last clause he had written my dignity into the foundation. I felt my knees go weak. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands shaking, and looked around. Clarice had taken down the painting I hung there in '89. In its place was a minimalist canvas, a white square, so fitting I thought, blankness over memory, eraser over history. That evening, Clarice came home from a Pilates retreat and tossed her gym bag onto the couch without looking at me. She pulled her phone out, laughing as she showed her screen to her friend. "Look what I said last night. It's on camera." I pretended not to hear, but her voice still rang out bold and clear. "She's not family, just a sad old leftover. She's the dust we forgot to sweep. Let's not make her think she matters." The friend laughed too loud. I didn't say a word. I just noted the time. That night I opened my old jewelry box. It hadn't been touched since the funeral. Inside was my wedding band, the one David had slipped onto my finger under a magnolia tree in the summer of 1973. It looked plain-worn gold, dulled by years of dish soap and sorrow. But I remembered something odd about it. In his final year, David had asked me not to resize it, even though it no longer fit properly. He said, "Don't take it off and don't give it away. It's more than it seems." At the time, I thought he was just being sentimental. Now I wasn't so sure. I held the ring up to the light, studying the inside. There, almost invisible, was a pinhole seam, a ridge. My thumb brushed over it. I took out my phone. I opened the NFC reader app, the one my granddaughter had installed for her college tap-to-pay system. I hovered the ring above the screen. A soft ping. Then the screen lit up. Loading secure file. DH, Legacy 3, password auto-unlocked via TOKMAC. My hands covered my mouth as the screen changed. A video began to play. David, sitting at his desk, dressed in the navy sweater he wore every Thanksgiving, looked directly at the camera. If you're watching this, it means you were smarter than them. It means they tried to cut you out. And you didn't let them. So here's what you need. He turned a page and began reading. I, David James Harper, being of sound mind and body, declare this amendment to my will to be binding and final. His voice was calm, legal, but under it all, there was a quiet fury. The video continued, listing the deed to the house, 4 bank accounts, retirement portfolios, a majority share in Harper & Company. Every document flashed on screen, watermark stamped and authenticated. All of them. Every last one had my name on them. Not his son's, not Clarice's, mine. I wasn't just in the will. I was the will. The next morning, I took the ring, the video file, and a printed transcript to Charles's office. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He read the clause. He reviewed the footage. He examined the metadata. Then he looked up at me and said, "It's over." I nodded, steady and quiet. "No," I said. "It's just beginning. He'll leave the house to me. The stocks, too. She'll be gone before winter." That was the first thing my son said when the lawyer invited us to the firm's downtown office for the official reading of David's will. He didn't even look at me, just leaned back in the chair, cocky smirk carved across his face. Clarice sat beside him, arms crossed in a perfectly curated cashmere set. She looked like she was posing for a lifestyle magazine. I sat quietly. I'd chosen a navy blouse, David's favorite color, on me, and pinned the brooch he gave me on our 40th anniversary to my collar. I didn't come dressed for a funeral. I came dressed for a reckoning. Charles, our lawyer of 27 years, took his time. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and placed a small silver tablet on the table. Everyone leaned forward. "Per Mr. Harper's explicit instructions," Charles said, "today's reading will begin with a video message recorded 6 months prior to his passing. This video has been authenticated and encrypted. It will only play upon biometric confirmation by the intended heir." Clarice scoffed. "Dramatic much?" My son raised an eyebrow. "We don't need theater. Just read the document." Charles didn't flinch. "It's not theater. It's binding." He turned the screen toward me. "Mrs. Harper, when you're ready." I took a breath and removed my wedding ring, the one David encoded. Inside the band, a tiny NFC chip hummed softly. Charles handed me the fingerprint scanner. My hand didn't shake. I pressed the ring against the scanner. A green light blinked. Match confirmed. The tablet screen glowed, and David's face appeared. He wasn't frail. This was no deathbed recording. He was steady, composed, alive. "If you're watching this," he began, "it means my wife kept her promise to outsmart them. This is my final statement to be read only when the vultures gather." My son shifted in his seat. Clarice's eyes narrowed. David continued to my wife, the one who stayed, not the ones who claimed. "You loved in silence, so I made sure your truth would roar when they tried to erase you. You were the architect of our life. You gave up your youth, your career, your nights, and your peace to keep me and this family afloat. When I broke, you stitched me back together. When I lost, you stayed. You are the sole heir." There was a stunned silence. Then he began listing. "To Evelyn Harper, I leave our home at 1188 Huntington Drive. Harper & Company, with all voting rights and profits. $112 million in diversified holdings. Full access to all bank accounts and retirement portfolios. My wedding ring is both symbol and key." Clarice stood up. "This is a joke!" Charles raised a hand. "Sit down or leave. This is legal testimony." David's voice continued. "To my son Andrew, you disappointed me. Not because you failed in business, but because you failed in decency. To Clarice, you broke her heart the moment I was buried. You mistook cruelty for strength, entitlement for inheritance. You were never my choice. You were a cautionary tale. Clarice screamed. He never said that. He never. Charles turned the screen. Date stamped, encrypted, verified. You are not named anywhere in the original will. Your revised copy was forged. My son buried his face in his hands. Mom, please. We didn't mean for this. We were just scared lost. I turned to him. For a moment, I almost saw the boy who used to bring me dandelions in the yard, but the man before me had chosen his side. I stood. I may have been your shadow, but I was never your servant. He reached for my hand. Please. I pulled it back. You told Clarice I'd be gone before winter. You were only off by a season. Charles rose. As of this moment, Evelyn Harper is the sole legal owner of all Harper family holdings. You are hereby required to vacate all properties not under your name within 72 hours. Clarice shoved the chair back and stormed out, cursing under her breath. My son remained frozen. I turned to Charles. Please make arrangements. I'd like their belongings boxed and mailed. No labels, no letters, just done. He nodded. As I walked out of the office, I slipped the wedding ring back on my finger. The chip inside it was silent now, its secret delivered. But I felt its weight more than ever. It didn't just carry a marriage. It carried justice. You have 72 hours to vacate the premises. The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom, calm but absolute. The gavel hit once sharp and clean, and that was it. Clarice's mouth fell open. My son stared at the floor like it might crack open and swallow him. I stood still, my hands folded neatly in front of me. I didn't blink. I had already cried every tear I was ever going to cry over these two. Outside the courthouse, the world continued like nothing had changed, but everything had. By the time we returned home, moving trucks were already waiting in the driveway. I had scheduled them the day before. Not for me, for them. Clarice stormed inside like a tornado in designer heels, slamming drawers, barking orders, grabbing armfuls of clothes, as if the more frantic she looked, the more she could rewrite the outcome. My son trailed behind her, dragging boxes, half-heartedly bumping into furniture he once called his own. I stood at the top of the stairs watching. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Clarice spat, pointing a half-filled trash bag at me. I didn't answer. She turned away and knocked over the framed sign that used to hang above the fireplace, the one she had proudly replaced after David's funeral. Celebration of new energy. I picked it up, brushed off the corner, and leaned it back against the wall. Then I quietly brought out my own sign. 4 words. Gold lettering. Black walnut wood. Hers. Since day 1, I set it by the front door. The next one I placed in the garden. Right beneath the fountain where she used to sit with her rose and fake laughter borrowed. And the last one I nailed to the gate post, returned to the rightful owner. When the movers asked if I had instructions, I simply said, "Don't rush, but don't wait." At noon, a brass band arrived exactly as I requested. 3 horns, 2 drums, and 1 accordion. They weren't professionals, just a retired local group from my church. But oh, they played like angels with a vengeance. Clarice stepped out onto the porch, eyes wide. You hired a band? I smiled. They offered as the movers hauled out Clarice's fur coats and my son's gold-framed certificates. The band played When the Saints Go Marching In, proud and just a little out of tune. The neighbors peeked through curtains. A few came outside. Some clapped. One woman even waved a little American flag. I didn't ask for that, but I didn't mind it either. Clarice screamed, "This is humiliating!" I replied, "Then you understand how I felt every day since the moment he died." She muttered something about suing me, about taking me down, about exposing the truth. I pointed to the lawyer standing beside me. "You can try, but truth already spoke." By sunset, the house was quieter. My son approached me as the last box was loaded. He didn't look smug anymore, just tired like a boy who stayed up too late playing with fire and burned everything down. "Mom," he whispered. I looked at him. He dropped to his knees on the porch right where David used to stand every Sunday with his coffee and his garden gloves. "Please don't do this. We were overwhelmed. We didn't know what to do without him." I crouched beside him. "You didn't lose him, Andrew. You gave him away. And then you tried to erase me too." Tears welled in his eyes. "I thought she was helping. I thought we were a team. You were I said, "Just not with me." He clutched my wrist. "Don't let this be the end." I pulled my hand back gently. "It's not the end. It's just not your house anymore." Clarice appeared behind him, red-eyed and silent for the first time in months. "You're cruel," she hissed. I rose. "Cruel, no. Cruel was what you did when you made me invisible in my own home." As the truck pulled away, I walked to the porch, my house, my porch. I took down the guest Wi-Fi sign Clarice had taped up last month, the one that said, "For residents only." I tossed it in the trash. Then I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air smelled like lemon oil enclosure. I poured myself a glass of water, sat in my chair, listened to the silence. For the first time in a long time, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I could have retired. I could have taken the $112 million, bought a villa in France, and disappeared from the map like a ghost who finally got her piece. But ghosts don't build empires, and I built this one. 3 weeks after the eviction, I stepped into the marble lobby of Harper & Wade International, the company my late husband and I started in 1976 with 3,000 cents a typewriter and a filing cabinet that always jammed. People paused mid-step. Some stood a few, whispered. Most just stared. I walked straight to the elevator, heels clicking like war drums. When the doors opened on the 27th floor, I stepped out into the executive suite where Clarice had once taken selfies at my old desk feet on the table, wine in hand. The door to the chairman's office was already open. A new brass nameplate gleamed from the wall. Chairwoman Emerita, architect of everything you forgot. Inside, everything smelled like lavender oil and a freshly cleaned conscience. I sat in the chair they said I'd never see again. I ran my fingers across the grain of the wood oak from the tree David and I planted behind our first office building. They cut it down when they built the parking lot, but we saved one plank. Unmemory. Clarice showed up 3 days later uninvited, of course. That hadn't changed. She wore a black pencil dress and the fake pearl earrings she always claimed were heirlooms. Her lips were drawn tight. Her hands trembled slightly behind a forced smile. "I just want one last chance," she said. I raised a brow. "For what?" "To prove myself," she said. "To contribute. I know I was difficult, but I've changed." I slid a manila folder across the table toward her. "What's this?" she asked. I folded my hands. "The invoice for the office floor you cracked with your stilettos during your empowerment dance last quarter." She opened it. $3,216 due upon receipt. Her face flushed. "You're joking." I smiled. "No, I just don't believe in free damage." She stood shaking and left without another word. The following week, I held a press conference. The room was full. Journalists, shareholders, ex-employees, and women who once sat beside me in silent bathrooms after board meetings where men talked over us. I stepped up to the podium, the lights warm on my face. "I won't be pressing charges," I began. "I won't be writing memoirs or giving interviews to talk shows or going on a revenge tour, though God knows I've earned one." A few people laughed. Most leaned in. Because I don't need noise to make a point, silence has already been beau. I held up Clarice's invoice and paid in full. Cameras flashed. I continued. "But I will be doing one thing, building something louder than their eraser." I announced the purchase of a newly restored colonial estate on the Atlantic coastline. 4 bedrooms, wraparound porch, a view of the sea from every window. Not for me, for them. For every woman who had ever been locked out of her own bedroom, her own bank account, her own name. It was called The Reclaiming Place, a sanctuary for older women who had been emotionally, legally, or financially abused by their own families. A place to start again. A place to breathe again. A place to remember who the hell they are. We offered legal help, vocational guidance, quiet. That part mattered most. Not therapy, not forced healing, not pep talks from strangers who never cried on a cold tile floor. Just quiet and choice. 2 months after the doors opened, we were full. I spent weekends walking the beach near the house. Not to stay there. I still liked my city apartment with its creaky radiator and bitter coffee, but to see what it looked like when dignity grew back. On one particular Sunday, a woman named Muriel handed me a note before I left. She was 73, wore red lipstick every day, and had arrived with nothing but a broken wrist and a shattered heart. The note read, "You don't know what you've done, but I do. Thank you for letting me matter again." I folded it and placed it in my coat pocket. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I sat on the beach alone, exhaled deeply, and allowed myself to smile. Not the kind of smile you give when you're pretending to be okay. The kind that comes after reclaiming your own name. Christmas Eve came quietly. No choir, no lavish party, no crystal chandeliers shaking from the base of a DJ Clarice once paid 10 grand to modernize the house vibe. Just a fire crackling in the hearth. The scent of cinnamon and old roses, and the soft hum of conversation that didn't bruise. I had invited 6 women to my home that night. None of them shared my blood. All of them shared my story. They had been cast out by their own called burdens, ghosts, freeloaders, forgotten relics of a past no one wanted to remember. One had been locked out of her daughter's house on her birthday. Another had signed away her pension under pressure. One had slept in her car for 3 weeks while her son posted vacation photos online. Tonight, they wore velvet, they wore lipstick, they wore scars with pride. We sat around the long oak table. The same table where Clarice once held strategy brunches and snubbed my decaf request. Tonight it held warm bread, roasted vegetables, and wine that tasted like survival. I raised my glass. The others followed. To the erased, I said softly. They echoed louder. To the erased who rewrote themselves, laughter, real, full-bodied, unapologetic. Later, after the candles had burned low and the women had gone to their rooms, my granddaughter slipped quietly into the living room. She looked older than her 14 years. Her hair was in a braid like mine used to be. Her hands were small but strong. She handed me a folded card made of thick paper painted with tiny gold stars. On the front, it read in her handwriting, Grandma, 2 million. Clarice eviction notice. I laughed and she grinned shyly. She tried to throw away your pillow, she whispered. I kept a piece of it. It still smells like lavender. I kissed her forehead. You're not like them, I said. Don't ever let the world convince you that silence is safer. She nodded, and I watched her disappear down the hallway like a promise I didn't have to keep alone. I sat alone for a while after that. The wind howled lightly outside. The snow tapped gently at the windows. I walked to the display case I had installed by the front door. Inside, under soft white light, sat a glass box, and inside it the wedding ring I had worn for 42 years. Next to it, a plaque used not for love, but for justice. That ring had opened bank accounts, proven fingerprints, cracked open secrets, and sealed an empire. It had been forged in loyalty, abused in silence, and resurrected as a weapon no one saw coming. I didn't wear it anymore, not because I didn't love David. I still spoke to his photo every morning, but because its weight had done its work. Now I wore only a thin silver band engraved with the words, I stayed, I built, I returned. At the company headquarters, just inside the glass atrium, hangs a single framed piece. Not a photo, not a certificate, just a white sheet of paper embossed in silver with one sentence etched across the middle. They tried to quiet me with shame, but I kept one thing louder than all of them. The truth. No one touches it. No one dares. It is the first thing every new employee sees when they enter, and the last thing Clarice ever looked at before she walked out with her stilettos. Clicking on polished marble floors one final time. I do not seek revenge. Revenge is exhausting, and I am done with exhaustion. I seek legacy, and legacy. I've learned doesn't always come in the form of statues or biographies or interviews. Sometimes it comes in the form of an old woman sitting by the window on Christmas Eve, smiling not because the world remembered her, but because she remembered herself. They tried to erase me. I wrote back underscore. They thought the will had already been read. They thought it was over. But my husband, he always left one more chess move. 3 weeks after the Christmas toast, I received a letter in a familiar handwriting. Not printed, not typed, written in ink, the same shade of blue he always used. Royal Executive. I knew because I bought it for him every year. Inside was a simple note. For the day they begged not before. And a key. I knew what had opened. Back in the old wine cellar now cleared of clerices, rebirth chamber crystals, and junky yoga mats. I found the mahogany cabinet we never touched. It had belonged to his grandfather, a man who built legacies, not trends. I unlocked the top drawer and found a sealed black envelope marked only with gold embossed letters. The will they never saw. I didn't open it then. I waited, and not long after the moment came. Clarice's voice, pitched perfectly between desperation and false humility, rang through my office door. "Evelyn, may I speak to you?" "Just a moment of your grace, please." I looked up. She was shaking. Her nails bare her posture no longer that of a queen bee, but of a worker ant who had lost the map. My father sighed. They had oil leases. If I could just stay near the company, help grow it again. I know I made mistakes. I raised my hand. "Sit." She sat. I pulled the envelope from my drawer and placed it on the table between us. I didn't speak. Her eyes darted. "What's that?" I smiled. "Insurance." Clarice reached for it. I pulled it back. "It's not yours to open," I said, "but I'll let you read it." She blinked rapidly. "You will?" I nodded. "But first I want to hear you say it. The truth." She hesitated, swallowed. "Then I tried to erase you." I waited. She exhaled. "Because you reminded him of everything I couldn't be, of loyalty I didn't have, of strength I didn't respect. I thought if I replaced the photos, the rooms, even the name on the mailbox, that I could erase the woman who built this. But I was just playing dress up in a crown that was never mine." I slid the envelope forward. She tore it open like a drowning woman grasping at a rope, and she read. Her face blanched, her jaw dropped, her voice cracked. This says, if I ever return with apology, not born of greed, that I may be granted mercy, but only if approved by the sole heir." I nodded. "Correct," she dared to hope. "So you'll let me stay?" I leaned in. "No," I stood. "This will was written not for you, but for me. A reminder that kindness must never again cost me clarity. That forgiveness is not owed, it is earned. And you? Clarice burned your currency long ago." I turned to leave. She whispered, "Please." I didn't stop. I opened the door and motioned to security. They escorted her out again. This time, there was no band, no parade, just silence and the sound of dignity closing a door that should have stayed shut long ago. Weeks later, I had the will framed and placed in the company lobby, beside the glass box containing the ring. Above it, a bronze plaque read, "Mercy is not weakness, it is strength disciplined." The media, of course, caught wind. Widow CEO rejects daughter-in-law's plea with hidden will. They called it ruthless. I called it restoration. And still letters came in from Kansas, from Detroit, from El Paso. Women in basement on couches with pensions stolen and voices silenced. I responded to each one, not with sympathy, with blue envelopes. Inside a card, a bank transfer, a message. "You are not alone. You were never the problem. You are the root." A month later, my granddaughter visited again. She brought tea, she brought laughter, but most of all, she brought peace. She looked up at the ring behind glass and asked, "Isn't it strange, Grandma, that something meant to bind love ended up unlocking justice?" I smiled. Maybe love always was justice, just hidden in vows too quiet to hear. As she nodded, then she slipped a new card onto the shelf beside the ring. It read, "Grandma the shadow who became the sun." And for the first time in years, I let myself cry, not for pain, but for the echo of a life that had been silenced finally shouting back. _ If this story touched your heart, you're not alone. Because somewhere out there, there's another Evelyn, another woman who built everything and was told she was worth nothing. But the truth, she was the foundation all along. If you believe in justice, dignity, and stories that give voice to the silenced, subscribe to where forgotten women take back the pen and rewrite the ending they deserve. Tap the bell, leave a comment, and share this with someone who needs to remember. They can still fight. They can still win. And sometimes the quietest ones strike loudest.